folks. Okay, welcome. This is This is lesson 7, Act 2. You guys were asked to read through Act 1 and watch the film up until the end of Act 1. Act 1 takes you through the wonderful ball that happens. It's a very fun kind of introduction to Romeo and Juliet. The very beginning, we get an idea of these two different families. There's the Capulets and the Montagues, and those two families are battling against each other for years and years. We get that from the first scene with these sort of peasants that are fighting against each other on both sides. Okay, they're actually. Let's go right to the beginning of the book here. This is what it's going to be like. I'm going to just sort of read through some of the most important lines that I know of and just sort of speak to you a little about it. I want you to get as good an understanding as you can from these little videos and from the script and watching and viewing different adaptations of this story, because it's a wonderful story. At the beginning it says, this is with Samson and Gregory at the very beginning, and these are they're kind of just serving men of both families. And so the whole idea is, there's a really important line there saying that from the masters all the way down to their men, that there are arguments and fights between these families, and then the prince comes in and splits it all up, right? Part, you fools, rebellious subjects, enemies to peace. You know that line in there. It's a big monologue there. It's one of the first monologues in the play by the prince. And he ends it by saying, once more, on pain of death, all men depart. He was trying to say, let's split this fight up. He's a little bit like a referee in that, okay? And working through Act 1, going on to Scene 2, this is when, Romeo sort of ends up... Benvolio is introduced, who is his cousin, of course, and Benvolio and Romeo have this sort of, it's actually a little pathetic, actually, Scene 2, because Romeo is sort of all very sad about being so in love with this woman named Rosaline, and so he says that he has so much love for Rosaline that and he doesn't think that he's good enough for her. Essentially, through Scene 2 is what's happening here. In Scene 3, Act 1, Scene 3, we are introduced to Juliet, of course, so it's kind of a scene change. If you can imagine the play, it would go to the Capulets' house, the Capulets' mansion, away from Romeo and anyone else, and Juliet and the nurse are chatting, and I believe Lady Capulet, which is Juliet's mom, comes in and kind of speaks, and they're talking about how Juliet should probably get married. Keep in mind, Juliet is around 13 years old at this time, and so pretty funny for a family to want their daughter to be married so early on. But a lot of cultural and history comes from Shakespeare, right? We can see that was probably pretty normal in that time period, about 400 years ago in England, that it was actually quite common to be married at such a young age and then be thinking about children a few years after. So you can kind of be thankful that you're not in that time period, because it was a very different culture than we have now. And then we have the Scene 4 in Act 1. This is when Romeo and Benvolio come across, and Mercutio, of course, another friend. They come across, I believe, a servant that introduces them, I believe, maybe that's not that point yet, but introduces them they welcome them to come to a party later on that night. And so then we come to Scene 5, and this party is at the Capulets' mansion. And the Capulets' mansion, we have at the very end of Act 1, it gets a little tense, because of course we're introduced to characters like Tybalt. And Tybalt is like sort of the kind of an evil cousin of Juliet, and very protective over the family. And Tybalt, you'll learn, it's kind of the villain in the story. But I'm on line sort of 55 or 56 on Act 1, Scene 5, when Tybalt says, "This by my voice should be a Montague," talking about Romeo at the party. "Fetch me my rapier, boy. What dares the slave come hither, covered with an antic face, to fleer and scorn at our solemnity? Now, by the stock and honor of my kin, to strike him dead, I hold it not a sin." Right? Immediately, this is one of Tybalt's first time he speaks. He's an angry man. He's not a very nice guy, right? He says, "Uncle, this is a Montague, not our foe. He's a villain that is hither come in spite to scorn at our solemnity at this night. He should not be at this party," is essentially what Tybalt is saying. And then Lord Capulet, which is the Juliet's father, is actually kind of trying to calm Tybalt down. And Juliet's father is pretty intense himself, but he's trying to calm Tybalt down. "It's okay, man. It's okay that Romeo and the guys are here. Like, I know they're not part of our family, but like, we don't have to get so intense." And then, of course, Juliet and Romeo lay eyes on one another, and the rest is history. Honestly, they kind of share like their first kiss at the end of Act 1, and then we kind of know that romance is going to play on. And what I love so much about Shakespeare's plays is that there are so many similarities to some films and TV shows that we watch. When you watch a romantic comedy or something, you'll find that at the beginning it'll be a bit tense, and then they'll find each other, and then the love will begin from that point on. So then we go on to Act 2. Act 2 will just take you through the scenes. In Act 2, Scene 1, Romeo sticks around the party when everyone else has gone home. His cousin and friend are looking for him. That's obvious when Benvolio is shouting, "Romeo, my cousin Romeo, Romeo!" When you see it, you can imagine that being the text. So if you just read the book like a book, you don't really get that. But Benvolio says, "Romeo!" Like he's shouting for Romeo. Can't find him, basically. Like they're outside this castle, they're kind of in the yard, and Romeo's kind of off trying to find Juliet, and his buds are like, "We're going home, man. Are you coming with us?" And so, of course, Mercutio says, "Nay, I'll conjure too, like, I'll yell too. Romeo, humors, madman, passion, lover, like, where are you? Come on, man, like, now's not the time, essentially. Now's not the time to go to Juliet. Like, come on, let's go home," basically, right? And what do you think Romeo does? Obviously doesn't want to go home. He's overcome by passion and love for Juliet, so he wants to find Juliet. And at the end of Scene 1, Benvolio and Mercutio basically give up, and they just leave Romeo behind. That may have happened to you guys at some point, maybe at a party or something, or it may happen in your future, where some friends leave the party before others because the others want to stick around, maybe for a love interest, maybe just to hang out, right? Maybe some people leave a little bit earlier, and that's exactly what's happening here. The friends just sort of give up. They're like, whatever, we're leaving. And that's it. Benvolio, his last line in Scene 1 says, "Go then, for 'tis in vain to seek him here that means not to be found." Like, let's get out of here, Benvolio. Act 2, Scene 2, perhaps the most famous scene. This is my favorite scene. I wish that we were in person because we do a lot of fun things with this scene. But this is when Juliet calls down to Romeo from the balcony of the Capulets' mansion. To the right is the actual image of the balcony that inspired the scene in Italy, and Romeo and Juliet exchange their first words of love here. So these are very, very famous phrases that I'll have in a bit of an assignment for you in the future. But for example, Romeo begins in Scene 2 with this, "But soft, what light through yonder window breaks? It is the east, and Juliet is the sun. Arise, fair sun, and kill the envious moon, who is already sick and pale with grief, that thou her maid art far more fair than she. Be not her maid, since she is envious. Her vestal livery is but sick and green, and none but fools do wear it. Cast it off. It is my lady. Oh, it is my love. Oh, that she knew she were." It's just so romantic and so passionate, right? Romeo, of course, sees Juliet. He's actually not speaking to her right now. It's called an aside. He's sort of speaking to himself. If you can imagine a huge mansion and you see the love of your life come out of this, onto this balcony, and you'd have to shout for her to hear you. And so he's saying, sort of underneath his breath, like, "Soft, what light through yonder window breaks? Like, is that Juliet? Type thing. And then Juliet actually hears, she has her own aside when she's out on the balcony, and Romeo kind of hears her a little bit when Juliet says the most famous line in the play, and possibly one of Shakespeare's most famous lines ever, when she says, "O Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo?" That, of course, is Juliet speaking to herself, being like, "Ugh, I want you, I want Romeo, I don't want anybody else," right? Romeo, Romeo, I met you tonight, literally that night, and I want everything with you and not with this family. She wants Romeo. And so Romeo says, "Shall I hear more, or shall I speak at this?" Like, when should I speak up? And then Juliet says again, "'Tis but thy name that is my enemy. Thou art thyself, though not a Montague. What's Montague? It is nor hand, nor foot, nor arm, nor face. Oh, be some other name belonging to a man." Of course, Juliet's now kind of telling herself that it's okay that he's a Montague, that it should be okay, that, these families should come together. And then Romeo, "I take thee at thy word. Call me but love, and I'll be new baptized. Henceforth I never be Romeo." That's when he first speaks. And then, of course, Juliet is really, frightened, because this is, at night, and he's in an orchard, listening to her speak. A little creepy, but very funny. Juliet says, "What man art thou, that thus bescreened in night, so stumblest on my counsel?" You surprised me. So then they have a little bit of a lovely back and forth. They really talk to each other. A lot of words of love. Romeo says, "I have night's cloak to hide me from their eyes, and but thou love me, let them find me here. My life were better ended by their hate than death prorogued, wanting of thy love." They have a really nice chat here, and it goes on and on and on. You can watch it. I would like you to watch it, view it, and also read through the script. After that balcony scene, we go to scene 3, where we're introduced to a character called Friar Lawrence. Friar Lawrence is a very important character in Romeo and Juliet. He is kind of like a religious and social mentor, I say, to Romeo. He's a leading character and acts in good faith. So, for example, Romeo comes away from that wonderful first night with Juliet and thinks, who am I going to tell this to? I have to tell somebody. Again, relatable to our experiences. Sometimes when you have a really good night with somebody, or when you really like somebody, you want to go tell your friend that you really like that person, right? And so this is a little bit like Romeo, but he didn't really know who to tell. The friar is the most trustworthy character, sort of the most trustworthy contact that he had. And so he goes and tells the friar, and also the friar would be able to marry them because he's this religious leader, which is kind of crazy that he's already thinking of marriage, but that's what it's all about. And so, of course, Romeo goes and tells Friar this, "Then plainly know my heart's dear love is set on the fair daughter of rich Capulet," talking about Juliet, "as mine on hers, so hers is set on mine, and all combined, save what thou must combine, by holy marriage." Honestly, he's asking Friar, the next day, he's asking Friar if he can marry Juliet. And Friar goes, "Holy St. Francis, what a change is here! Is Rosaline, that thou didst love so dear, so soon forsaken?" This is Rosaline again before. This is Romeo's past love, but he's, of course, fallen in love with Juliet. And near the end, Friar's like, "Yeah, okay, cool, I'll marry you guys." We go on to scene 4. Scene 4 in Act 2, we get to the Capulet side, and we kind of learn about the nurse, but it starts with Benvolio and Mercutio talking to each other about the whole thing, about what's going on with the whole situation, kind of talking about Tybalt a little bit, and how the fights between the families, just kind of bring that back in there. And then the nurse comes in. The nurse comes in sort of halfway through scene 4. The nurse is a little bit like the friar on the Capulet side. So the nurse is kind of, again, like a bit of a constant. She's a very nice character, very trustworthy and understanding of their relationship. So I say here, Romeo ends up meeting up with the nurse in this scene and tells her of the intense love that he feels for Juliet, and asks her to help arrange that marriage. Helps to arrange, all happens very, very, very fast. And so the nurse agrees. In the end, the nurse goes, okay, I'll go tell Juliet essentially that you are in love with her and we'll try to work things out. And that's pretty much what happens in scene 4. Scene 5, the nurse arranges the marriage between Romeo and Juliet. This moved very quickly, I keep on saying that, but of course Juliet can't stop thinking about Romeo, and the nurse comes in and has a bit of a conversation with Juliet, and they really talk about who would be better, Romeo or Paris. And Paris is the person who she's sort of meant to be with. She was going to be arranged, a marriage was going to be arranged between her and Paris. But Juliet, of course, is like, no, it's it. Like, everything is set on Romeo. I'm going to marry Romeo. And the nurse says, okay. And she says, then hie you hence to Friar Lawrence's cell. There stays a husband to make you a wife. Now comes the wanton blood up in your cheeks. They'll be in scarlets straight at any news. Hie you to church, I must another way, to fetch a ladder by the which your love must climb a bird's nest soon when it is dark. Essentially, the nurse is now saying, okay, let's do this, but how are we going to do this carefully? But you're going to go to the friar's cell and you're going to marry Romeo in secret. And then we have scene 6. Scene 6, act 2, the last scene of the second act. The friar, it's just the wedding, essentially. They're married. And by act 2, Romeo and Juliet, who just barely met each other, they get married. The friar ends up marrying them at the very end. It says, come with me, and we will make short work. For by your leaves you shall not stay alone till Holy Church incorporate 2 in 1. So essentially, we're not going to exit until you are married. And that's it. They get married. The wedding itself, I find fascinating. The wedding is not in the actual play. It's not written into the script. Of course, there would be some sort of adaptation of a wedding on stage. Like, they would want to make it so that it's very clear that Romeo and Juliet are getting married. But I always kind of find it fascinating that Shakespeare didn't write that into the actual script. There's no, do you take this Juliet as your lawfully wedded wife? It doesn't happen. They just say, we're going to make it happen. That these people are now married. So Romeo and Juliet are now married as we enter Act 3, which is about just before halfway through the story. And that's it. So they are now married. For your assignment today, we just want to keep on reading and keep on viewing. So I really want you to get up to Act 3 on the script. Read the No Fear Shakespeare. Read the actual passages. I've read some of the important ones to you in this film, in this little video, but I want you to read as much as you can to really get a sense for that script. And then look at the modern translation and see what that all means. Because I'm going to have lots of assignments for you in the future when we start working with this stuff. I'm going to have you like look at some of the traditional text and tell me what you think it means in your own words. Okay, that's a lot of our worksheets for this class. In fact, on the exam or whatever we end up doing for the exam, a lot of Romeo and Juliet, I will just be probably giving you bits of script, and I want you to analyze it and tell me what is this from and what does it mean. Essentially, that's because it's beautiful text, and we want to read that and really get a good sense of what it's about. Okay, so I'm just going to read it. It says, again, we are simply reading through the script. The film is uploaded on the topics page. You can use SparkNotes No Fear Shakespeare to read the script, and I also want you to watch the movie.